This is 24 in 42. Welcome to 24 and 42. Tonight we get to greet Jack Mackenzie, who smart people might know as someone else. I have worked with his alter ego several times, MD Jackson. But tonight we are talking to the writer, not the artist. Welcome, Jack. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Like you said, I am a dual personality. As a writer, I use the name Jack Mackenzie. As an artist, I use the name MD Jackson. But tonight, I'm talking about the writing. I'm talking about the Jack Mackenzie name or brand. Uh, and I've been writing and doing art for as long as I can remember. Both are passions of mine, and I plan to continue doing both as long as someone gives me some scratch for it. So yeah.
And we met, I think, 2004 or 5 at the SF Reader Forums with the old Flashing Sword e-zine.
Yeah, that's right. We go way back. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Little matter of a logo for the Rogue Blades line
Yep.
comes from his hands. So thank you
Yeah.
very much for a long history together.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's been fun.
What kind of stuff do you write?
I write fantasy. I write science fiction. I don't have that many literary pretensions. I write space opera. I write with fantasy. I write sword and sorcery is my preferred genre. I have written some, I don't know what you call it, epic fantasy, that sort of thing. But for the
Okay.
most part, I tend to stay sort of grounded and um, I space opera, robots, ray guns.
And a certain duo that I enjoy quite much.
A certain duo, yes. Uh-huh. Uh, Casertago and Poet.
Will we
Which
be
is
hearing about them in the questions ahead?
okay. Well, yes, we'll talk about them later. But
Okay.
yeah,
All
yeah.
right. Spectacular. Well, let's get down to it. I got a little stopwatch here that you can't see, and it's
Mhm.
not a race. It's just to see how we're doing on our 42-minute goal.
Okay.
So let us get started. And there we go. Question number 1. What color do you write in?
I write in black. What color do I write in? I write in black. The letters are black. The screen is white. Uh, I can't write the other way around.
Okay.
I know I've had like there's blog posts and stuff like that where you can write with the white on the black,
Right.
and I find it very confusing. So I tend to stick to the white, plain white letters on a white or black letters on a white screen.
Gotcha. All right. Just what do you call it? An icebreaker. There we go.
Okay.
All right, the serious questions, the one we all want to know. Did you grow up in the city, the country? Did you have friends when you played outside and had your adventures? Tell us how you grew up.
I grew up actually in the suburbs.
Okay.
You know the movie E.T.
Yeah.
You know Elliot's life before the little alien shows up.
Sure. Right.
That's kind of how I grew up. Riding my bikes and going from house to house, or actually the series Stranger Things, if you've seen that.
Okay.
Before things get strange, the
Yep.
kids are riding their bikes and playing D&D and that sort of thing. That's how I grew up.
Awesome.
Mostly in a suburban area. I mean, we were never too far from the wild spaces.
Okay.
Uh, and I grew up actually with when I lived up north. I lived in a very small town up north, and I grew up with G.W. Thomas, who you've had on the show. Actually, Gary was my oldest friend. He's we met in grade school.
Awesome.
So
Okay.
so we grew up together. We would go out into the woods where they had to teach you how to be careful because you could get lost in the woods or eaten by bears. But for the most part, we stayed in town, and it was a very suburban kind of environment. But yeah,
Still a little bit safer than today, though, right?
a little safer than today. Yeah, like
Yep.
my kids, I wouldn't. I don't know if I'd let them go off and do the things that I did when I was younger, because you know when my kids were growing up, it's like, yeah, no,
Yep.
it's not safe.
Different world.
Yeah.
If you could follow the yellow brick road, would you?
Um, it depends on which direction, I suppose. I mean, on one end there's a wizard and a whole bunch of stuff to do, You know, I mean, I might just go the other way and see what's there. You know, I mean, you know, I know all these munchkins are looking for me to, you know, do something, but you
Save
know,
the day.
I don't know. I would follow it, but you know, who knows what direction I go.
Bust away into the fields around it.
Sure, yeah.
All right. When you're writing, what typically assails your ears?
Um, it's pretty much anything. I can write in pretty much any environment.
Okay.
I have you know a YouTube playlist that I usually have while I'm at work, and if I'm writing, I'll usually throw that on. But
Okay.
at the end, everything sort of fades away. I mean, I know Jane Austen. They said that she would write, you know, on in a notebook, surrounded by in a salon, surrounded by gossiping women, and people think, oh, I don't know how you could do that, but you know, you get to a point where you can tune everything out,
Okay.
music, noise, you know, whatever. But I mean, yeah.
So it
So
doesn't matter if there's lyrics, you can tune them
uh,
out.
I can write in silence. I can write with music going. I can write with sort of industrial work going on outside.
Okay.
I'm pretty much good at tuning it all out. So.
Give us a hint. What's on that YouTube soundtrack?
Oh, actually, this it's a very eclectic. There's lots of Bowie. There's lots of Tom Waits,
Okay.
but there's also some Frank Sinatra, and uh, some even some Japanese singers.
I'm taking notes because I'm going to throw pictures up on the screen. So I'll get a couple names up there for people.
Okay.
All right. Here's a very important one. What were three of your favorite books as a youth, as a child?
Probably my favorite book when I was younger, when I discovered science fiction fantasy. Um, uh, One of my favorites was I loved Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Okay.
I mean, I love the Tarzan books, but I think my favorite of his was At the Earth's Core.
Oh, okay.
I must have read that one a dozen times, and before I bought my own copy, I probably borrowed Gary's, you know, and he was bugging me to give it back. But yeah, I read it, you know, many times. Uh, Actually, Gary and I lived a few houses down, so we would trade books back and forth all the
Oh, that
time.
is so cool.
He was a
Okay.
big Robert E. Howard fan, so it was because of him that I discovered Robert E. Howard, and I read the Conan books, you know, Conan the Buccaneer, those Ace or those Lancer paperbacks, you know,
Yep.
Conan the Buccaneer, Conan the Freebooter, those kind of books. I love those. I didn't have too many of those myself, but I would borrow Gary's. But the other one that I would have is uh, when I was younger, I went on vacation, and my brothers and I were in the back seat of a car on a road trip, and we were fighting, and my mom was tired of us arguing, so we stopped in a small town. She gave us some money and said, go buy comic books so that you can read something on the rest of the trip. So I go into this bookstore and I'm looking through it. I don't know, I'm looking for Star Trek paperbacks or whatever, and I find this book. It's called Doc Savage.
Ooh.
I was like, what the heck is this? I was astounded. And I bought it. Of course, it was only 25 cents. So I bought it with some others. But I read it while I was on vacation. And I was like, wow. And then I discovered there's 181 other ones. So
Right.
I was hooked on Doc Savage. So any Doc Savage paperback, I would snap those up.
That's awesome.
I still have a whole lot of them. But
I wish I would have kept mine. When on one of my moves and cutting down, I had to make some hard choices, and I don't have a single one right now.
yeah. Uh,
Number three. One more.
Wasn't it that?
Oh, are you calling Rock?
Edgar Rice Burroughs, At the Earth's Core.
Yep.
Conan
Oh,
the
okay.
Free Conan
Okay.
book,
All right.
and Doc Savage, any Doc Savage book.
Conan the Buccaneer, then.
Conan the Buccaneer,
All right.
Savage. The first book I ever got of Doc Savage was The Other World.
Okay.
It had a picture of Doc fighting these weasel creatures, so that was like I was hooked.
Those weasels, man. They made a cover of one of those adventure magazines too.
Yeah, weasels ate my flesh.
Yeah.
No, those old men's magazines.
All right, here's one putting you on the spot because you could still be watching it today. What was or is your favorite cartoon, and when and where did you watch it?
My favorite cartoon.
Yes.
Oh, well, I actually, you know, when I was a kid, I was a huge Star Trek fan.
Okay.
But I started out watching Star Trek the animated series because we didn't get the
Okay.
actual real Star Trek show
Yeah.
until later. But you know, yeah. So Star Trek the animated series was my absolute favorite when I was younger. I was watching cartoons on Saturday morning.
I like it.
Yeah, I mean, other than the usual, you know, Warner Brothers, the Bugs Bunny cartoons and things like that.
Right.
Bugs Bunny Roadrunner Hour.
Yep,
I watch
exactly.
that every Saturday night. But yeah, so when I was a kid, those were my favorite cartoons.
Great, I love it. I grew up watching little black and white TV for. My parents got rid of television when I was 7. Wanted us to read and not have TV. So, but
Yeah.
prior to that, I remember Flash Gordon, and from your part of the country, Sergeant Preston and the Yukon Patrol or whatever it was.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember that ever? The guy on the
Sergeant
sled
Preston.
with the. Yep, I remember
Yeah.
that.
Actually, and that's well, I'll throw in another one. There's a Canadian classic, which few people have seen across the border, but it's Rocket Robin Hood, uh, and you can find it on YouTube now. But yeah, it was a Canadian produced cartoon, Rocket, basically Robin Hood in outer space.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll have to look that up. I'm gonna look
Yeah.
that up. All right. Well, I'm writing that down. What is the best thing that you consider you spent money on to further your own writing career?
The best thing I've spent money on is basically all the books that I have. Uh,
Okay.
I spent, I collect books. New ones, old ones, used ones. I've got like a shelf I got shelves all around me. You can't see them, but and the ones behind me that's actually just a background. But I do have lots of books, and reading those has basically done more for my writing. You know,
Yep.
becoming familiar with the way the story structure works.
Yes.
Just getting it inside. Knowing what a story is, and what people, what's exciting, and what touches people, and that sort of thing. And that all comes from reading books. That's what I've spent them. That's the best money spent is
Sure.
buying books and reading them, of course. Yeah,
And noting what makes you react.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The things that I love, that's what I produce now. That's why it's like these are the things that I absolutely loved. Growing up and
Cool.
reading. So these are the kind of things I write now.
Good. Excellent. So while you're writing, do you think it makes your writing more difficult or somewhat easier if you feel emotion strongly?
Um, Sometimes it does. I don't think it's necessary to feel a lot of strong emotions, as long as you can describe it, as
Okay.
long as you can write it down, get the right words, get it across to people. I remember seeing an interview with a songwriter named Diane Warren. Diane Warren wrote, "Faith of the Heart," which was
Okay.
the theme song for the Enterprise, and she wrote, she wrote like songs for Rod Stewart, and she's written a lot of very big popular songs. But she wrote this one song for a band called Aerosmith. It's probably their only number one hit, and it was called "I Don't Want to Miss a Thing."
Okay.
First line of that is, I could stay awake just to hear you breathing, and people hear that and they think, wow, that's this amazing love song, But I saw an interview with Diane Warren, and she said, I don't think I would ever do that. That, it's like, that's just not something I would do. But she wrote the song, but it's like, yeah, that's not something I would do. It's not, I don't really, I'm not feeling it, but she found the right words and made a lot of other people feel it, and made a
Right.
lot of money for Aerosmith. So,
That is a great opening line, though.
so yeah, so I think if you can find a way to describe a strong feeling, um, you don't have to necessarily feel it yourself. It probably helps if you do.
Okay.
I mean, I'm writing something now about a guy who's running through the snow, so it helps that I know what it feels like to get your hands and your feet really, really cold. But
That is definitely helpful. Yep. So when you're writing, titles, are they a challenge? When do they come for you? At the beginning, halfway through, when it's all done?
um, it depends. I mean, some titles, if I start writing something, and I do have, I mean, over the last couple of years, I've developed a fairly regular writing schedule.
Good.
So I'll sit down and I know what it is I want to write. So I'll put a, a filler, just a filler title, uh, and sometimes it'll stick, and sometimes it'll change halfway through.
Okay.
What's more important is that I discover what the story is, while I'm writing it, and then the title usually comes later. Although sometimes I do start with the title. Actually, my book, The Gear Crew, which I don't know if you can see this,
Yes.
probably not that one, that started with the title. The title actually existed long before the book did. So, so I knew I wanted to have a book and I wanted it to have that title.
That's
But
often actually the way I write. I have I can't tell you how many times I've written a whole story based on the title I popped in my head.
Hmm.
So that's why this is an interesting question to me, because to me titles, there's only one recent title, and it's happily going to show up in a magazine this January, or well, January of 25. It's coming out, and it's the only title I regret because I never changed it, never went back to it, and it's not clever. It's just a single word, and usually I have at least a 3 to 5 word title that I feel is clever.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I've had that case where I've had a story that's had one title throughout its entire creation, and then right at the last minute, it's like, you know what? It'd be better if it were called this.
Yeah,
You know, and sometimes editors suggest other titles. And,
true.
it's like, okay, cool.
But like that opening line you were just referencing, I got a spreadsheet of suggested titles from poems, from song lyrics, from other stories. Several Robert E. Howard have fragments of a sentence are like, that's a cool title, and what story will pop in my head to match that title, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting question. So when you're working on a project now, moving on to the next one, I'm curious about your timeline. From initial story idea, if you ever need to do research, to how many drafts till you say, I'm done, this is either being submitted or wherever audience is, it's ready for them.
Well, like I said, over the last couple of years, I've developed a fairly regular writing schedule, which is um, so when I start something, I'll finish something and then maybe take a couple of days and then start something else. And I have, sometimes I know what it's going to be. Sometimes I got no idea where it's going to go.
Okay.
And I tend to do research while I'm writing. Um, so, for instance, with my Wild Incorporated books, uh, those are sort of thrillers. They're set in the present day. I have to do a lot of research on that with um, places, technology, like simple things like airplanes. What is this called? There's the things underneath the wings. What are they called?
Right.
What's the right word for them? So I'll be doing research, um, and I actually got that advice from a writer named C.C. Humphreys, who he's a historical writer, and he writes the Jack Absolute books. Because I was talking about a historical novel I wanted to write, and I said I don't start it because I keep thinking I need to do more research, And he laughed. He said, "No, you don't." He said, "Just write it, do the research while you're writing.
Okay.
The research as you're writing, the research you do will inform your work, your writing, and will make it a lot richer. So don't stop. Don't let research stop you from writing." And
Do you,
that was nice. So
do you ever get sucked in though and realize you've wasted 5 hours researching?
I fall down lots of rabbit holes.
Okay.
Actually, and like one of my second Wild Incorporated novels, one of my characters gets stuck in the sewers of London. And I don't know how much research I did about the sewers and how they smell and and what the way they connect up with the various old tube stations and things like that. Very little of it made it into the book, but it did prove to be fascinating.
Cool.
Um,
Yeah.
but
I
I
can see
like
that.
that.
Yeah.
I don't want to waste too much time because I'm busy writing. I got to move on to the next scene. But I thought every once in a while I got to stop. Just got to figure this out. So yeah, I've lots of rabbit holes.
In a fascinating world like that, it was unusual and it was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're all done writing, when you call it a day, are you
Mm-hmm.
exhausted, ready for a hot bath and a good drink? Or are you ready to rock and roll and get out of the house?
Um, Actually, yeah, the bath and the drink sounds good. Although sometimes, it's when you finish writing something, especially if you've been really intensely working on it, I find uh, I get a little bit of like that moment that the time that we just went through, that time between Christmas and New Year's where you're not sure what time it is and you're still in
Right.
your pajamas and you don't know whether you want cheese or chocolate or whatever. It's like a very confusing time between stories. I just got to let that one sort of go away before I move on to the next one. But particularly if they've been really intense, yeah, it's just sort of wander around with a sort of stunned look on my face. I don't know what to do.
Does your family allow you to write?
Yeah, no, I usually find a schedule that works,
Good.
around my family time.
Okay.
So yeah, yeah. They're usually pretty good about that.
Would you live in any of the worlds that you have created, and which and why?
Oh well, probably not actually. My characters are a lot more active than I am. Um, you know, particularly, I mean, well, for instance, in my Wild Incorporated books, which are set in the modern day. I mean, I live in that world
Yeah.
because it's the real world, sort of. But I wouldn't want to be anywhere near where they were because they, once they start, they just go and it's like one thing after another, and it's just like kind of like, and usually it's over 3 days, and there's just so much going on, and it's like that's just too much activity for me. You know, I will occasionally let them sit in a cafe and have a coffee, maybe, but they won't be able to enjoy it for long. But I prefer to actually sit down and have a couple drinks and watch the scenery and not be doing a whole lot of moving around. Um, and especially my, like the Sartago and Poet, I mean, their world.
Yep.
Interesting as it is, it's got a whole lot of monsters in it. And that's something I can do without.
I hear you. Yep.
You know?
I like asking that question. I actually got the first time answer recently. They said I would live in my world, but not in any of my stories.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's a good caveat. Yeah. Oops, pardon.
Yeah.
All right, I teach a monthly writing class. If I were to invite you to attend and give you 30 seconds to give one piece of advice, what would you give to the writers?
You know what the advice that I would give is to write. Don't second guess. Don't say, "Oh, I got to research this." Just sit down and write. And if you can do a regular schedule, even if it's just 500 words, if you can sit down and write, well, they said Neil Gaiman wrote Coraline at 50 words a night.
Yeah.
So if you got any time just to sit down and just put down words, keep doing that.
Right.
Any kind of regular schedule, but just sit down and write. And I mean, don't, if something comes out that's really weird, just go with it. Don't short circuit your creative process.
Those are almost identical to the two primary pieces I give. Butt and chair.
Yeah.
Because we all say we got a story to tell, but it doesn't happen unless you put your butt down.
That's right.
Start doing it.
Well, that's what Stephen King says, right? He said that, the inspiration will strike, but it's more likely to strike the guy who's at his typewriter typing.
Yeah, right? That's true. My favorite piece of advice from King's book, and actually one that I've quite adopted, is he always said to never finish the last sentence you're writing that day. So then the next day when you start writing, you pick up right where you left off. It's all built up in your head, and you just take off. And that has really actually helped me quite a bit. I like that.
Yeah, I that's a good piece of advice, and it works for me, unless I'm too enthusiastic and I get to the end because I wanted to finish it, and it's
right.
Like, now what do I do?
Let's see. What do you think is the most difficult thing you have ever written?
Probably the most difficult thing that I've ever written has been one of the shorter pieces. I find it very difficult to write short pieces because there's so much that I got to say. Things will just spread out. I actually wrote a story about, and it has never found a home, but I wrote a story about the Beatles if they never became famous.
Okay.
It was sort of an alternate history. It's like the Beatles, they something happened and their career got scuttled. So what would happen to them? How would they?
Interesting.
Yeah. Do you hear that?
I hear it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where it's coming from. There it is. Stopped.
Okay.
I think it's my smoke alarm. My daughter's.
Uh-oh. If those books start burning behind you, I'll let you know.
Okay.
What gave you that idea?
So that was probably one of the most difficult. I thought at the time it was one of the best things I'd ever written.
Okay.
It's a very short story, and it hasn't found a home yet, but it might soon.
Throw something supernatural in there. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see here. All right. Some sporting choices for you. This is an either or.
Okay.
Swimming pool or shooting pool?
I don't know what a shooting pool is.
Shooting pool. Pool and
Oh,
cue stick.
shooting pool.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Actually, yeah, shooting pool.
Okay.
I, rather than a swimming pool.
Yep.
Sorry, I thought you meant a
Messing with
shooting.
you. I was
Yeah,
messing
shooting
that.
pool. Oh,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Matter of fact, I used to waste a lot of time, drinking beer and shooting pool. Um, my wife and I would go to the pub, and I would smoke her for the first couple of games, and then so she kept buying me beer until finally she won. So yeah, absolutely shooting pool.
That's the way to do it.
Yep,
Tennis court or basketball court?
tennis court. Yeah, I've actually I like tennis. I mean,
I like tennis.
it's I haven't played in a long time, but yeah, I used to like, basketball. Yeah, it's a bit too sweaty.
You play it when you're young, but then you go
Yeah.
to the men's game, right? And last one, driving range or target range?
Actually, I don't really do either of those, but I think golf. I find golf kind of tedious, but I would be interested in going to a firing range. I got a friend who does do a lot of shooting. He used to live up in Prince George, and he's moved to Kelowna, which is closer to me.
Okay.
Uh, um, and so going to the shooting range is something that's definitely a possibility. It's something that I'm very interested in. A lot of my characters are very familiar with guns. They use guns. I do research on guns, especially when I'm illustrating. A mutual friend of ours, Joel Jenkins.
Yep.
Um, I've done a lot of covers for his books,
Right.
and his books have got a lot of guns and stuff in it. So I have to do a lot of research about these guns, what they look like, how big they are, So that's something that I would be much more interested in doing than actually.
I want to specify. I said target range, so there is bow and arrow. I would even take axe throwing.
Okay, well, I've done axe throwing.
Yeah,
I
you
went
got
to
a
a
target and you're throwing at it.
festival, in nearby. It was a couple of years ago,
All right.
and I said they had axe throwing there. I was like, I got to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I got to get more drunk, but I will absolutely do that, and I did. Yeah. And archery is something I used to do when I was younger, actually. Yeah, so definitely target range would be more interesting to me than driving.
Driving
range.
range. All right.
Yeah.
Would you happen to have a favorite quote and be willing to share it with us?
A favorite quote?
Yes, sir. Or song
Yeah, well,
lyric or poem.
yes. One of my favorite quotes comes from Tom Waits,
Okay.
and his quote is, "I like beautiful melodies telling me terrible things."
Ooh, yeah.
That sticks with me, because I do tend to gravitate toward darker stories, darker fiction, but at the same time I like a lyrical sort of quality to it. So anything that's kind of has this lyrical quality, but at the same time it doesn't shy away from the
Yeah.
dark aspects of humanity is something that I'm interested in. There's another quote from him actually that I is one of my favorites. It's a goofy quote, but it's the world is a hellish place, and bad writing is interfering with the quality of our suffering.
Okay. That's a new one on me.
I like that one. But yeah, I love his work. Tom, if you know Tom Waits, that's his style. He's got, sometimes it's not so beautiful melody, but sometimes it is, and it tends to tell stories about the darker aspects of humanity, and that comes from if you're familiar with the Bertolt Brecht and his work with Kurt Weill and story, plays like the Threepenny Opera, where we get the song "Mac the Knife" from,
Okay.
uh,
All right.
and the happy end, where you get the Alabama song, "The Moon of Alabama," which was a hit for the Doors. It's they have that quality of beautiful lyrics, but they they sing about everyday life and
Yeah.
things that aren't quite so clean.
That quote is, like you said, lyrical is the perfect word to describe that.
Yeah.
All right, here's a little Rorschach test for you. I'm going to throw out 10 single words, and I want your first reaction.
Okay.
And this is an adult show, so whatever you say. All
All right.
Eels.
Eels.
Yes.
Actually, eating eels in London, they used to actually eat eels, and so I jellied eels, jellied eels.
So you've been there? Have you done it yourself?
I have not eaten eels,
Okay.
but I know people who used to love jelly eels.
Mediocre.
Um, I the first thing I thought of was Amadeus, the movie Amadeus.
Oh, yeah.
Salieri was this court composer, but he was mediocre, and he was faced with Mozart, who was a genius, and he had to destroy him. So
That's a
that's you
great
say
first
mediocre.
thought.
That's the
Yeah.
first thing that comes to mind is.
A lot of the things you reference are musical. Are you also, do you have a third persona in the music world?
I have not. I do not play music at all. My daughter is musical. My granddaughter's becoming very musical. She can play the drums like a hot damn. But I don't play music. I'm not very musical, but I love music and I
Okay.
love songs and discovering new songs, discovering new music. Very very much a musical
Well, I'm
person.
going to add a question for you because this is new to me. It's only 2 weeks in my experience in life. Pirate metal.
Pirate metal. That sounds so cool.
Well, look it up because there's a whole world of it. I
Yeah.
never knew it existed until 2 weeks
There's
ago.
a lot of different metal kind of bands. The Swedish metal,
Yep.
I mean, death metal and I recently heard a band from what was it? Wuhan, something like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
It's
Yeah. I
Chinese
listened to it.
metal. It's
Yeah.
there's great stuff. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
Pirate metal. I gotta look that up.
Oh, some of the songs are pretty raunchy too, so beware.
Well,
All right.
I would expect no less of a pirate song.
Stampede.
Calgary.
Okay. Anger.
Uh, Motivation.
Delivery.
Uh, Deliverance. Burt Reynolds.
Yep. I tried to not say deliverance to see if it would get there anyway.
Delivery.
Tundra.
Tundra. Actually, the Mighty Boosh. There was a British TV comedy series called The Mighty Boosh, and they did a thing about the tundra, the whiteness of the tundra. That's what comes to mind. You can look that up.
Saber.
Tooth.
Yep. Mask.
Mask of Eternity. Sorry, it's the title of one of my books.
Yep. I like it. Speech.
Speak the speech, I pray you. I can't remember. That's from Hamlet. Speak the speech, I pray you. I can't remember the quote. That's what comes to mind.
And the last one is fructose.
Fructose, high. What was it called? High corn fructose, high sugar corn fructose. Don't get me started about fructose. I did a lot of research about the history of food in America, and fructose is a really interesting subject.
Okay.
Sorry about that, but I won't get into it.
Is that in one of your Wild Ink books?
No, actually, it was, I don't remember what it ended up in, but it was just a rabbit hole that I fell down. But
All right.
high fructose corn syrup. That's what it is.
Yep. Yeah. All right. We are hitting 31 minutes, so we are doing very well.
All right, good.
Do you read nonfiction? And if you do you have any recommendations or favorites that you think other people should read?
I do read nonfiction. I try to read a lot of nonfiction. My favorite nonfiction books, though, which I would recommend, especially for writers,
Okay.
are both by Stephen King.
Okay.
Stephen King's On Writing
Yep.
is one of the best books. And people will sort of poo-poo it, but honestly, he gets right down to the heart of, what it is you're doing as a writer. And I've read that thing many, many times. I've got a copy of it. I've read that, about half a dozen times, and it's my go-to book.
Okay.
So Stephen King's On Writing. Another book by Stephen King that I absolutely adore was one of his earlier books. It was Danse Macabre,
Yeah. Okay.
which is a little bit about writing, but it's also a little bit about the horror genre and the world and there's so many interesting things in the book, and I every once in a while I'll pull it out and I'll start reading it. So yeah, Danse Macabre by Stephen King, probably one of my favorite nonfiction books.
Okay. I think you're our first to have both your recommendations from the same author. I like it.
Yeah.
All right. Here's where we talk some art.
Okay.
I'm looking for the art that moves you. Any visual form of art that inspires you, captivates you. Who do you like?
Well, I like M.D. Jackson. Um, as an artist, of course, I've studied a lot of artists actually, and I've written about it actually. I wrote about art for Amazing Stories, the
Okay.
website.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Okay. All right.
I spent and before that, I wrote for the Heroecology website.
Okay.
I didn't write a whole lot about art, um, but um, one of my favorite artists, and it's probably everyone's favorite artist who writes any kind of fantasy, and that's Frank Frazetta.
Okay. Yep.
Frazetta's impact. I mean, his technique, his style is not, it's very rough. It's very loose. Um, you know, a lot of people, it's not to their taste, but a Frazetta picture, a Frazetta image is like a punch to the face.
Oof, yeah.
It's the impact is not necessarily in the colors because his colors are all muted, or his technique. It's just he knows how to create a picture that will be in your face. I mean, anything you think of, like the Silver Warrior, which is the guy with the sword. He's got the polar bears pulling this.
Right.
There's only like one color. It's all just blue, right? I mean, there's very few colors in it, but the image itself is just so impactful. It's like it gets into your brain and says, "What is this story?
Right.
What is going on here? This guy with the sword, with this sleigh, and he's being pulled by polar bears. What the heck?" I mean, that's inspired so many other authors and writers. I also like Boris Vallejo.
Okay.
Get his calendar every year. Him and Julie. I mean, he's a technically a better painter, but I don't find him, especially recently, don't find him as impactful. His technique is impeccable, but his images aren't. They don't have the same punch as Frank Frazetta.
Isn't it amazing though that he and her teamed up? I mean, what are the odds of that happening in life?
What, Boris and Julie?
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Well, I know it's great that they did. Yeah, because
exactly.
their styles are. Actually, Julie, I think, had more of a positive impact on Boris than the other way around. Well, they had an impact on each other, but
Right.
Boris's work for a while was just I was kind of meh. But then when he got together with Julie, it went off in a better direction. So I was happy.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yep. I have the Outlaw of Torn lithograph on my wall behind.
Mm-hmm.
If this banner wasn't here, but that's always one of my favorites of Frank's work.
Yeah. The Outlaw of Torn. Yeah.
That's my favorite ERB book, so it worked out well.
Actually, there's another favorite Frank was the I think it's that Cormac Mac art or that, which is just these guys. So this undulating, flowing thing full of these cavemen coming at you, and it's like you don't know you're frozen in terror just staring at it. You should run, but you can't because it's just
mesmerizing. Yep.
Image that's coming at you. Yeah, that's another one of my favorites.
And I, for one, totally appreciate that MD Jackson fellow is inspired by these guys.
Well, he's produced some good stuff. He's produced some crap too, but we don't talk about that.
I think all of us artists in Word or in whatever version of ink, we've all produced some crap. So
yeah.
All right, back to your writing. When you're creating your characters, how do you give them depth, and do you treat first, second, and third characters differently?
I don't know that I give them depth.
Okay.
The way I work, they just seem to have depth.
Okay.
If they do, I mean, the more depth they have, the more central a character they'll be. I mean, because I've got a lot of minor characters who I can hear their voices, and I can hear them, and sometimes they'll surprise me with what they say, but the less they surprise me, the more minor characters they become. But
okay.
I mean, the main character of my Wild Incorporated book is a guy named Harry Calhoun, and Harry will always say something that surprises me while I'm writing, because Harry has a problem where when he's cornered, he tends to run his mouth, right?
Okay.
So if he's in a jam, he'll just start running his mouth, and he'll say the most outrageous things, stuff that I don't expect him to say. I'm typing it, and Harry's saying this shit, and I'm like, oh man, Harry, don't say that, because I mean, it's moderately successful. Sometimes it'll get him, the other guy he's talking to, so mad he'll be able to escape, or he'll end up with a pop in the mouth half the time. So it's not always successful, but at one point in the book, he'll just start saying shit, and I'll be like, I don't know where this is coming from. But that's basically the way that I find characters' depth is I'll hear them say things, and sometimes say things that I don't expect.
Has a character ever a surprising character dominated and taken things away then from the one you
Yeah,
thought?
actually,
Yeah.
uh, the my book, The Gear Crew, which I showed you just a
Yeah.
minute ago, in my original outline, I had two main characters, and all of the secondary characters in the original outline were all killed.
Okay.
But as I was writing it, I realized they weren't going to do that. They weren't going to let themselves get killed. So they actually found ways to survive, which surprised me. Yeah, so they ended up actually all surviving till the end of the book,
I
which
like
I
it.
wasn't expecting. But it ended up making it a better story. And I was able to write a prequel story for Amazing Stories
Okay.
with those characters, and they will show up in the sequel when I eventually get around to it.
That's pretty cool. So, which of your own characters would you like to hang out with as a close companion?
Um, Again, probably not. It's probably the same answer as what world would I hang out in. I don't know whether
Oh,
I would hang out
okay.
with my main characters because, um, well, the Wild Incorporated crew, if they're not doing anything, maybe I'll hang out with them. But again, Harry, like going out drinking with Harry will say some shit that'll just make me laugh and, probably get him in trouble. But I don't, and I certainly wouldn't want to hang out with Surtago and Poet.
Nope.
Um, and if I did go out drinking with them, I would have to make sure that I know where my money is because it would probably all be gone by the end of the night.
Yep.
And they'd be gone. My money would be gone.
I'd probably sit by Poet too instead
Yeah,
of the other
yeah.
side.
They'd be fun to hang out with, but yeah, just don't expect to keep your money by the end of the evening.
One of my favorite questions now is who do you think writes the characters you most enjoy reading?
Actually, one of the writers who writes characters that I enjoy a lot. He's not a fantasy writer. He's actually the guy who writes the Sharp novels. What's his name?
Oh.
I hate when this happens. Uh, um, he writes the Sharp novels. He writes the books that uh, uh, there's a show about Uhtred of Babenberg. Um,
The
and
historical fiction guy, right?
historical fiction.
Yeah.
His name has just escaped me. But all of his characters, I love Richard Sharp as a character,
Yep.
and all of his characters are usually people who are interesting. They're a little bit roguish, but at the end of the day, at the end of the story, they always do the right thing. Bernard Cornwell.
Bernard Cornwell, yeah.
Bernard Cornwell. He
Okay.
writes characters that I always find them interesting, and it's like, yeah, I'll follow this guy. I'll follow this guy to the end of the book because he's an interesting character,
Okay.
and he may have some bad instincts, but at the end of the day, his better nature usually wins out. Um, Even Uhtred of Babenberg, who's a right bastard, but
Yep.
but at the end of the books, he's usually accomplished something.
If I remember correctly, the first interview of this series was with Jeff Stewart, and I'm pretty sure he said Bernard Cornwell. I know he loves reading him,
Yeah,
but I'm pretty sure he loves his characters too. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
And actually, and Bernard, I got to admit this, and it's pretty obvious. I have a character called Jefferson with Debt. I wrote two books, one called Debt's Pledge, excuse me, and Debt's Honor, and they owe everything to Bernard Cornwell and the Sharp books.
cool.
I thought the Sharp books would be great if they were set in outer space. So that's what I did. So Debt's Pledge and Debt's Honor
All
are
right.
a tribute to Bernard Cornwell.
I'll flash those on the screen there. All right. If you could write anybody else's character from any medium, would you, and who would it be?
Um, I would. I feel very daunted when I'm doing that now. But I actually have written. I've written some Star Trek fiction. There was a series of anthologies who was edited by Dean Wesley Smith, I think it was. It was called
Okay.
Strange New Worlds. This was before the TV series. Now, this was years ago. The company that had the license for Star Trek put out these books called Strange New Worlds, which were short stories based in the Star Trek universe, and,
Okay.
and they opened it up to basically anybody. Anyway, I wrote, and I met with Dean Wesley Smith, and I talked to him about it, and I wrote a couple of stories in the Star Trek universe,
Nice.
one in the Next Generation and one in the original series. They didn't make the cut.
Wow.
I
Okay.
did get some feedback on them, but they didn't quite make the cut. So I have written in the Star Trek universe,
Okay.
and I could probably quite easily do that. I would love to write for Doctor Who.
Oh, cool.
If
Yeah.
I could write a TV series, I would like. I mean, I love watching it, and it's always unexpected. So writing it would be like, well, I don't want, if I write it, then I got to come up with it. I don't know if I can, but I would absolutely love to do that.
I like it. That's a cool character. Last question. Are you trying to share anything in your writing?
Am I trying to share anything? Yeah, well, actually, I am, and um, in the Gear Crew, that I mean, it's a space opera book, but one of the things behind it, and I don't make a big obvious thing about it. I mean, I'm not writing messages or anything like that. As they always say, if you want to send a message, you use Western Union. But I did have a lot to say about the nature of time,
Okay.
and the nature of free will. And I tried to put a lot of that in there. And it's not gonna, if you don't have to read it that deeply, but for me, I put a lot of that in there that I wanted to say about what I feel is the nature of time,
Interesting.
and how we experience it. And I didn't feel that I had, excuse me, done enough of it. So I wrote another story called the Eye of Sarama, which is actually a sword and sorcery tale, which I didn't write it. M.D. Jackson wrote it. It's confusing here, but yeah, I actually published it under my own name. But it was about it features a sword and sorcery character called Braddock,
Yep.
and he encounters this woman who can see the future. She can see the past and she can see the future. And I wanted to say a lot about how I think that free will is an illusion. And that's a heavy concept to put into a simple story that's swords fighting and stuff like that. So you don't have to read it like that. But I mean, it's there for me. Okay. For me, I ended up saying a lot of what I wanted to say about how free will fits in with the way we perceive time and stuff like that. So,
okay. That allows you to explore it through your own writing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Well, that wraps up our questions, and we hit 44 minutes.
Okay.
So we did well.
Okay.
Now it is all the time you want to take to tell us 3 C's. Something cold you'd like some attention brought to, something current, and something as much as you're willing to reveal that's coming.
Okay. Well, the cold. Well, Gear Crew is cold, although it's more recent. My Jefferson Odette books are cold, and I think those are good books. I think they're a good story, especially the second one. And the second one has not gotten as much love as I would hope that it had. The first one sold many more copies than the second one did, and I thought the second one was a better book. But,
okay.
Something current is a book I have now called Madam Murder, which is part of my Wild Incorporated series. Wild Incorporated, I had the idea of, I mean, like I said, I love Doc Savage. And the Doc Savage books, for anyone who knows, they're set in the 1930s. They're these hero pulps. The Doc Savage, The Shadow, Operator 5. I love all those old hero pulps. Yeah. So I thought, well, let me do that. Let me do something like that, but I want to modernize it. I want to set in the modern times. So that's why I came up with the Wild Incorporated group.
Okay.
So sort of my take on the hero pulps. But the one that's available now, Madam Murder, I think it's a good adventure. It's a rollicking sort of tale, and there's lots of twists and turns. And of course, Harry Calhoun, my main character, he says some outrageous shit. But
can you grab that? Do you need to read them in order, or can you grab that one?
You can read them in any order. I mean, they're matter of fact, read that one now because it's better than the other two. I really did like the way that the previous one, the Deadly Mr. Punch, came out. The first one I read it and I was like, it could do with some work, but it's out there. So what can I do? Okay. I'll just keep writing them and then writing them better and better. But Madam Murder is what's out right now.
Okay.
As for what's coming, next week is my birthday, and I have promised myself that I would release this anthology of science fiction short stories, most of which have found markets. Some of them haven't, though. Okay. I planned 2 anthologies of the science fiction books that, stories that I had sold, and ones that hadn't. I was going to call it Unloved Tales. Unfortunately, several of the unloved tales ended up getting sold, so they weren't unloved anymore. So I ended up just combining it all. So it's a collection called The Cryo Game and Other Stories.
Okay.
It'll be released next week, and I'm just getting ready to do a publicity campaign for it. But it's a lot of short stories. Some of them are good. I think all of them are good, and some of them you may not like, but read the next one.
A
You might like that.
a full spectrum of genres.
It's fantasy, some horror, some stuff that defies categorization, but mostly it's science fiction.
Okay.
Mostly it's,
I'm gonna throw one caveat out here because he's or Jack saying right now it's next week, but this will actually be airing in May, so it's
oh, of
behind
course,
us.
yes.
Yes,
Okay, well, by May,
it's already
it'll
out. Yep,
sorry, I didn't.
that's all right.
But yeah. Although actually, here, January, February, May. In March,
Okay.
I will release a collection of Surtago and Poet stories.
Oh, that's coming. Good.
It's
Okay.
called Blades and Alchemy.
Blades of Alchemy.
So that will be in March, I think.
All right.
But then in June, okay, so when this airs, when this finally shows up, in the summertime, there's going to be a second one called Blades and Abominations, which contains a couple of the stories that the longer stories.
Okay.
And then after that, I will have another one. I have written another Surtago and Poet story called The Dragon God,
Okay.
in which I take Surtago and Poet into a fantasy version of Japan.
Interesting.
So it's kind of like a mashup of Shogun and a Kurosawa film and a kaiju movie. So it's that will be in probably late in next year.
Okay.
I don't know what the title is going to be, but the story is The Dragon God, and then it will be paired with another one that I haven't started writing yet, but it's going to be set in Eastern Russia.
They're really moving around. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, they're moving around. So I'm hoping to have two 40,000 word stories that I'll be able to put together. So yeah, so look for those.
Dang. Okay.
Blades and Abominations, Blades and Alchemy, and the third one I don't know what that's going to be called yet. But.
All right. And we will reveal some covers here by the time these are going to be going live, right? You'll share them with me? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, you heard it here, folks. First from Jack and MD.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you very much for spending this time with us and letting us all get to know the life, universe, and everything of yourself.
Oh, thank you. This has been amazing. This has been fun.
My thanks to Jack, Master of Disguise, for letting us peek behind his mask and allowing 24 in 42 visit his life, universe, and everything. Kids, I hope you listened close and discovered why arguing in the car can work to your advantage. For the rest of us, it was exciting to hear tidbits on drinking, the future of Surtago and Poet, and some rather hilarious and quite clever 10 first thoughts. Seriously, though, if you've enjoyed much of the art in RBE's books over the years, this is the man to thank. Now, go check his creative words out too and read some grand adventures. Until next time, this was 24 in 42.